Hello, and welcome to the very last session of the day. Plenty more tomorrow, but this is the last one for today. And a very special one indeed. I'm actually pleased to introduce Tom Heaton from Supermassive Games, the developers of the Until Dawn games, to talk about a new series, the Dark Pictures Anthology, and the first game in that series, Man of Medan. So, Tom Heaton.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I hope you're having a great EGX. I am going to talk a little bit about Dark Pictures and what we're going to do, what we're trying to do with Man of Medan, and then we're going to play the demo maybe you played out on the show floor, and I'll kind of talk through it. It'll be a bit free-form. We'll see how we go. And at the end, we'll do some questions. So if you've got questions, think of them now, and don't leave me hanging around at the end looking stupid. So first of all, we'll just take a look at the trailer to refresh your memory.
I've never been down there before. Diving.
This is Alex.
What's up, man? Conrad.
Good to finally meet you, Conrad. This is Brad, by the way, my little bro.
So is everybody on board and ready to go?
Lots of finding some sunken treasure.
You good?
More or less.
What do you know about this wreck?
Just rumors.
It was insane. It was like traveling through time.
Should have never gone down to that plane in the first place. Damn. Every single thing you bring back has an essence. I told you to leave everything down there alone. We have unexpected guests. What are you doing? Alex? Julia? Guys!
Thank you. So first of all, what is the Dark Pictures? Well, it is games that are intense, cinematic horror. It's brought to you by Supermassive Games, the creators of Until Dawn, and by Bandai Namco. And it is an anthology of games. It's a series of games. Each one is different. And each of those games has a player-driven narrative. They're huge, branching narrative games. At Supermassive, we've been going, we're about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary. And up to now, we've mostly put games onto PlayStation platforms. But with this series, for the first time, we are going multi-platform. We're bringing the Dark Pictures to the Xbox and to the PC, as well as to the PS4. And we are aiming to bring you 2 games a year. So that's the Dark Pictures Anthology. That's the kind of big idea behind the whole thing. What is Man of Medan? It's the first game in the Dark Pictures Anthology. And it's the story of 4 young Americans who go on a holiday of a lifetime. They are on a diving trip in the South Pacific. They're kind of diving wrecks, that's what they do. And they are with the captain of the boat they've chartered. And their trip goes horribly wrong. They run into a storm. They run into some locals who are difficult to deal with. And they end up on this massive abandoned freighter in the middle of the South Pacific. Their radio isn't working. Their engine isn't working. They're stuck. They're on maybe the most remote place on the Earth. And on that ship, there is something terrifying. We've got 5 playable characters, and each of those characters can survive, and all of them can die. And that can happen at many places in the narrative. And as developers, we have very little control over who gets to the end of the game. In fact, we have no control over who gets to the end of the game. So why did Supermassive decide to do an anthology? One of the reasons is that we love horror. It's in our genes. We love horror movies. A lot of people are horror buffs in the studio. We know how to do horror. And we identified many subgenres of horror. In fact, we sat down and had a meeting and worked out that there were 39 subgenres of horror. That's not very scientific. There's probably a lot more. But when you go and see a horror movie, you don't just go see a horror movie, you're going to see a slasher movie or a ghost story or some weird Japanese genre of horror that you've barely heard of. So as a studio, we wanted to explore each of these subgenres. We wanted to kind of really dig into it and get to know it and understand its tropes and maybe start to subvert it and produce something that was very entertaining within that subgenre. And an anthology gave us the opportunity to do that. It's also a format that's increasingly familiar, especially from TV, with shows like Black Mirror. People consume media in a different way than they used to. We think it will work well for games as well. Each of the stories, each of the games is completely standalone. People can play in any order. They don't have to start at the beginning and work through. They don't have to know who the characters are, because it'll be new every time. Every story will be new. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's one of the things that our fans were asking for. Ever since we released Until Dawn, people have been suggesting this idea in one form or another. So that was very exciting for us and something that we wanted to run with. I want to talk a little bit about our influences when we sit down and work out how we're going to make these games. The first influence is kind of obvious. It's horror movies, TV, books. There is a vast amount of this stuff out there. People love it, and it's been around for a long time. And we've really dug into that and looked for cool stories that we can tell. But another thing we look for are things in the real world. They might be myths, they might be folklore, or events that really happened, things that have a little kernel of truth. That's really useful for us, because the audience, when they come to our games and they know about this thing. For Until Dawn, it was a Wendigo. There's things they can look up on the internet. It has a kind of solidity that we can use that makes things feel more real. Another obvious influence is games with branching narratives. We do huge branching narratives. It's a growing genre. There are companies like Quantic and Telltale who are doing great work in that field. And of course, we're familiar with their games. We look to see how other people are doing things and compare it with the methods that we use. It's a very exciting genre to be in, and everyone is trying new things. And of course, we look at classic horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, maybe some of the more actiony horror games. There's lots of places to learn from, and all these people have developed things that work to scare the player, which is what we're ultimately after. And finally, and maybe you'd expect this less, but we look quite hard at psychology, at how the human brain works. We want to get inside your head. And a lot of our game is about relationships between the players. And we look at what happens to those relationships when they're placed under extreme stress. These are massive branching narratives. And at regular points in the game, you'll be asked to make choices and decisions, and every single one of those decisions matters. They matter to a different scale. Some of them will have a little effect on what you say or how people feel about you, but some of them have massive consequences. We're talking player death, or character death, I should say. And sometimes the consequences of the decisions that you make will not become apparent for a really long time. There are examples of choices you make right in the first act of the game that don't have a significant impact until much, much later. We work very hard to make sure that none of the choices are easy. Everyone knows how to be the good guy and to save a friend, but we try and balance it out. We try and add some risk, some uncertainty to that choice. Ideally, we want to give players a choice between two terrible options. That's what we really like to do. And because of this very branching narrative, we know that there is a lot of replayability. People want to replay our games. They get to the end and they've lost a few characters. The first thing they do is want to go back and try and save the characters that got killed, and then they usually go back again and try and kill everyone. So these branching narratives kind of are a playground for you to go in and work out how everything connects up. And finally, for each choice, we kind of have this framing device of do you approach things rationally or do you approach things emotionally? Are you acting with your head or your heart? And there's no right or wrong answer here. Whatever you do, the game is going to continue and give you a great story. But it gives you can think about what sort of person you are and how you'd act in that situation. Sometimes it is best to use your head, and sometimes it's best to follow your gut, and it's very difficult to tell when you're playing the game. Talk a little bit about the gameplay. So in a minute, I'm going to do a playthrough of the demo and talk in detail. But we've got a few different types of gameplay. We've got exploration. You can wander around. You've got direct control of the character. You can explore the nooks and crannies of the environment. And you're looking for objects, secrets, items, weapons, things that will give you a bit of an advantage in the game. Sometimes we throw you into these choices and you have to make difficult decisions. And then sometimes we step it up a notch into fast-paced action sequences where there'll be a rapid series of QTEs or choices. You won't have a lot of time to think about it. The consequences will usually be severe. It's a good idea to look out for things in the environments that give you some clue as to what's going on. It's the ship in Medan has many mysteries. So if you can find out some secrets and other hints and piece those together, you give yourself a natural chance of surviving a bit more. And relationships are really important for gameplay. This is a thing we learned from Until Dawn, that people really engage with the characters, engage with the relationships. How you treat other people matters and may come back to bite you. But it's not easy. We don't make things easy. People have got different priorities, different things they want to achieve in the world. So you kind of have to manage that as a player. We're aiming for a cinematic experience. And so we've taken a lot of inspiration from the cinema. We're looking to build cinematic quality visuals. And again, we'll see some of that in the playthrough. Really important thing is to get the empathy that we need you to have with the characters is that we get top quality actors. So we make sure we cast each game really well. We're looking for Hollywood talent. We want them to understand the characters that we want them to play and give them the space to make really great performances, memorable performances. And we have to make sure that we can capture those performances and get them in the game, because then we get a really good connection between you as a player and those characters. We need you to care about those characters. So yeah, we have spent a lot of time getting really great facial capture to get all the emotions that are captured on the actors' faces. Really important for you as a player when we go close up to understand instinctively what those characters are thinking, and the same amount of time on top draw body capture. Also from cinema, we've learned as a studio over the course of a number of games how important cameras are, cinematic cameras, understanding lenses and different types of shots, and also the importance of highly atmospheric lighting. We want it to look like a film, and lighting, it does that more than anything. And finally, we get a great audio team to really work on developing incredible audio that really adds to the atmosphere and creates scares on its own. Okay, so that's a kind of summary of what we're trying to do. I'm going to play through the game. I'm not actually going to play, I'm going to run a video, and I will talk over it. I'm not going to talk too much. I'm trying not to talk over the characters, but I'll just try and highlight some things that might be of interest. So we're starting here about midway through the game, a third of the way through the game. They've already reached the ship, and Fliss, who's the playable character, is with Brad. And they've been captured by Danny here, who's taken them to see his boss. So this is our first secret. Items that you can pick up and manipulate in the game. And we got the word Medan. And in the full game, you'll be able to go to the front end, look at that secret in detail, and piece it together with other secrets, try and work out what's going on.
Keep moving.
It's a little mini scare that always gets me, even after months of development. So we're creating an intense kind of claustrophobic environment here. And everything comes together. The environment, the visuals, the lighting, the audio, the acting, to kind of create tension.
Probably still right here with us. I mean, you die on the ship, you're gonna stay on the ship.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
What do you think happened to this guy? Face with him like that.
I don't know. Looks like nothing I've ever seen.
I don't know what the fuck this is all about. But we gotta keep moving and find Olsen. Now.
One thing I should say is this chapter can start in a number of different ways, which is difficult for us to reproduce in a demo. But you might be playing on your own. Brad might not be there with you, and he might be following along behind, or he might not be on the ship at all. So that gives you an idea of the level of the branching, even a third of the way through the game.
C'est quoi ce bordel? Okay, what just happened?
I don't know.
Of course, one of the things we're trying to do is create fear. That's basically what people play a horror game for. And because the characters in the game are scared and are visibly scared, that really helps us. That's transmitted straight to the player if you've got empathy with those characters.
Shit, got a lot of corridors. Guess we just gotta explore every damn one of them until we find a way out. We need to find a way up on deck. That can't be a good sign. What was that? Beats the hell out of me.
Again, camera angles doing so much of the work here in creating a tense and unnerving environment. Player will have to let the character walk away from them. It feels like you're having to let go of them. You can't peer around corners. You kind of have to trust that you're going to be okay. We create these really detailed objects that you can pick up and interact with. They're full of information. That's partly because to look realistic, they have to be full of information, but they've always got little stories inside them, little clues. It's always worth reading them. The player there is looking around with the torch. It's a lovely little mechanic on the right stick. You can just look around. It gives you a chance to see more of the environment. It will highlight objects that might be of interest. A weapon's always interesting, right? It's always useful. We don't really give you many weapons because it takes away some of the fear if you've got a big weapon at your disposal. We want to make you vulnerable, so if you find a weapon, you've done quite well.
Jesus. What happened down here?
Again, all these secrets, they don't tell you much on their own, but if you piece them together, the mystery starts to emerge. The little head scare there was a nice little thing that came out of development. It wasn't part of our original plan, but it really was effective when we tested it on people.
Brad. Try to keep it together, okay? I'm trying to get us out of here.
I'm sorry for a second. Just where are we? Do we know where we're going?
So there we go. Thank you. Little action sequence at the end there, and the action sequence can play out a number of different ways. And then right at the end, we had that little dilemma of would you save Brad or would you save yourself? And it's interesting, there's approximately a 50-50 split amongst players when they take that. So we reckon we got that one about right. Okay, so if anyone has asked any questions, please don't be shy. You will need to get up and head to the microphone, and I'll do my best to answer.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for telling us about Dark Pictures. I have two questions, actually, if that's all right. First one, from the reception of Until Dawn, what were the main things you took and improved for the future games?
Well, there were loads of things. So we learned a massive amount from Until Dawn. It's a new genre, so there aren't really templates. So everything we did, we had to kind of work out from first principles. So a lot of what we've done is a continuation and an enhancement of that. There's a couple of things that really surprised us. One was the reception with the streaming community. We didn't really, that was a kind of very growing thing when that was released, and we didn't anticipate it. And the game was very widely streamed, and I think it was a really good thing for us. It got us made us reach audiences that maybe we wouldn't have done. So that was one thing, and that changed the way we thought about the narrative for Man of Medan. We tried to create a narrative with that in mind, and to give people streaming interest, things that we tried to kind of work with them, not overtly, but to give them really interesting stuff they did. The other thing that people really engaged with was the relationships between the different characters. Now, we knew we'd created strong characters, but people really got into the relationships between all of the characters. And so we have strengthened that and thought about how we can reflect that back to the player a bit more.
Cool, thank you. And second one was, how long would each game in the Dark Pictures Anthology be, roughly?
The plan is that each game will last about 4 hours. Now, that depends on the speed that people play out. Some people whiz through games, some people look at absolutely everything, and it's going to depend on the individual games and the narrative and the branching as well. But that's our plan for about 4 hours. And if you're into replayability, then you'll get a lot more out of it, obviously, because you'll be able to go back, play again, get different outcomes.
Awesome.
Thank you
very much.
Hi there.
Hi.
So, you said it's going to be an anthology. So, are the games all going to be interconnected in any way at all?
No, the games are really completely separate and standalone. Each game will have its own plot. It'll be in a completely unique setting, and it'll have a completely different set of characters that you'll be playing. And you won't have to play any of the previous games in order to play the later games. We are planning to put little connecting strands between the games, but there is not going to be a kind of overarching thing. So I think it's best to think of them as completely standalone games.
I have got another question. Is that all right?
I don't know. Yeah, let's go.
Is that all right? I was a massive fan of the Until Dawn games, and I loved like the overarching like idea of like the Wendigo and stuff like that. What was your biggest influence for Man of Medan?
It's difficult to name a single influence. We certainly went and looked at films in the ghost ship genre. It feels like Ghost Ship and Triangle, and we were very keen to learn as much as we could from those. But our influences are very wide. You know, it's not just about one particular type of media. We will go very wide because we have a lot of content to create to fill 4 hours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My first question was going to be, did you have any experience from the Ghost Ship series? That you answered that. The second one was going to be, a lot of horror films in the industry are stuck on this cycle of jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, nothing more. There's going to be something more that makes me need to stop, go to the toilet, come back.
Yeah, there's there's two things for that. I mean, the first thing is we are not above a jump scare, I have to say. It's part of our tool set, and it's part of everyone's tool set. But we're more interested in creating sustained horror. That's a bit more difficult to create as well. And really, you won't get jump scares to work unless you've got some elements of that. So some of the stuff you saw there with exploration in those very creepy environments and the very low-level audio is designed to work on a subconscious level. And everything working together, the narrative, the way the characters are acting, the lighting, the environments, are to put you in a kind of heightened emotional state of a kind of anxious state. And we can sustain that for quite a long time. And that's when horror is best, I think, when you've got that dread of what's going to come and you don't know what that is, and you almost want it to arrive because you can't bear it for too long. So that's what we aim for most of the time. We are not above jump scares, though, because they've got their place.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hello. Right, so obviously as you showed quite early on in the presentation, you've got about 39 different subgenres of horror you're working with. With the plan of an elongated anthology and elongated series, what made you fall on this particular brand of horror as your opener into the series, as it were?
I think we wanted to do something that was noticeably different from Until Dawn. We wanted to shift it into a completely new environment, and the sea gave us that. And once we had the sea and the ocean, and the kind of there's lots of myths around that, from fishermen, sailors have loads of myths. So we started to look at those for sources. Really, it's kind of quite an organic process. We chucked around a lot of ideas. It's when two or three key ideas kind of coalesced that we said, yes, this is the one we're going to start with.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Hi. Is it okay if I ask 2 questions?
Yeah, no problem.
So, obviously, you mentioned you had really good voice acting talent. You had Rami Malek in Until Dawn. Do you know if there's any big voice actors or big Hollywood actors in Man of Medan?
We're not talking about the full cast at the moment, but you will have seen the trailer, and pretty much everyone recognised Shawn Ashmore from the X-Men series and various other things. And he was a delight to work with. He's really into his gaming, very knowledgeable about it. And it's great to have someone like Shawn on board. One of the reasons he's well known is because he's very good, and it's great to give him the opportunity to create that character.
Yep, thanks for that. And my second question is, obviously you're really good at creating your own original stories, but if you got the opportunity to work on like an IP, say like Scream, or if Konami gave you the opportunity to work on Silent Hill, would you take the opportunity?
Oh, I think as a business, we'd take everything on a case by case. But Dark Pictures is really, because they're standalone and they're heavily branching, it helps that we create everything. Because the branching stuff is very difficult to do. And it's easy to get tied down by it. So the fact that everything is new, even game by game, we're not tied to anything we've previously done, is a real help when we're making the games.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for Until Dawn. It's one of my favorite games, and I don't typically like horror games, so it was quite a surprise for me. Just a really simple question. Is there going to be any level of like enhanced for Xbox One X, or for Pro?
Yes, is the simple answer to that. There will be enhancements for Xbox One and Pro.
Great, thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I think.
Thank you, Tom. So that was Man of Medan.
Okay.
I hope the special edition comes with like adult diapers, because it looks pretty scary. That's it for today, but come back tomorrow at 12 for, I believe, the Total War session. It's all about the concept of Wu Jing. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So another round of applause for Tom Heaton. And see you back tomorrow. Thanks very much.